I'm Isabelle Gontier, Chief Assessment Officer at PSI Services, and I invite you to delve deep into the world of testing with me. Every episode, I'll be on the virtual couch with experts from the testing industry, engaging in conversations about the latest developments in our field. Your quest for testing knowledge starts here. So, welcome to this episode of Tried and Tested. I'm very excited to host Sae Schatz to our podcast today. Some of you might have had the privilege of seeing her in action at the opening keynote for ATP Innovations in Testing earlier in March. And if you have, you know that this podcast is going to be awesome. But if you have not, then I'm happy that we'll give you an opportunity to hear from Sae to learn more about her vision and perspective as it relates to lifelong learning. It is so apropos for a lot of discussions and initiatives that we're having in the assessment and credentialing industry. So this is absolutely my pleasure and privilege. So welcome, Sae, to our podcast.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. It's like I was telling the folks at the Innovations in Testing conference, which that was my first time ever being at that event. And I found my people. I found my fellow measurement and data and psychometrics nerds. And I'm really excited to be here to talk about those kinds of topics and the future of learning and learning technologies and everything else we're going to talk about.
Yeah, this is great. Well, welcome to our family. You fit right in. This is awesome.
Awesome.
So, what we usually do is that we ask our guests at the beginning of the podcast how they got into the assessment and credentialing space. But I think probably it makes more sense for me to ask you, what does assessment mean to you and how it has impacted your life?
So it's really interesting. So just to give you a little background to lead into that,
Mhm.
when I decided I would go to university, I thought I'm going to go get an art degree. And so I started out actually as an artist, and I gradually moved into graphic design and computer based art and web design, and eventually into computer science, and eventually into usability and user centered design throughout all of that. Um, and at first I was really interested in psychology and how people think and the differences between well-designed websites, artifacts, logos, and poorly designed ones. And I remember at one point in time, I had a knockdown, drag out fight with my major professor about the importance of things like aesthetics and usability for practical outcomes. I ended up going on and getting a PhD in modeling and simulation, which is very technical, right? So, like artificial intelligence
Sounds
is
like
based
it.
upon that sort of thing, but with a focus on human systems. So, how do you model people? How do you think about the interface between humans and technology, or in particular, between cognition and technology? And everything keeps coming back to this notion of measurement because you know the old saying, right? You can't manage what you don't measure. And usually people take that to mean, oh, well, everything has to be these objective hard measures, right? We need scantrons, we need SATs. But really what it means is that you need to have some way of seeing the impact on the world.
Yes.
And that could be qualitative, it could be fuzzy, but if you don't have some sort of feedback loop, then you can't improve the system. And so to kind of bring this around full circle, the reason I think that measurement and testing and assessment are so important is because that's how we know we're making an impact. And that's how we know what we need to tweak and what we need to improve, whether that be something, so-called fuzzy, like somebody's preference for aesthetics or the perceived usability or learnability of a system, or things that are so-called hard or more objective, somebody's skill performance, the effectiveness of an organization. I'm a really big fan of thinking about measurement not in terms of these black and white or even formative and summative sort of categories, but across a much broader spectrum. Sometimes you don't need to have precision in your measurement, right? Sometimes you just need enough data to decide whether to go with course of action one or course of action two. Sometimes you just need qualitative information.
Mhm.
Sometimes all you need is five experts' inputs because that gets you enough general information to move forward. So that was a really long answer to say, I think that assessment, broadly defined, measurement, evaluation, assessment, these underlie everything we do because the things that matter can be measured, not in the way that we often hear that old saying used, in this objective sense, where everything is hard and rigid, but in the true sense of it, it really does empower us to improve everything we do.
I love it. And I think that's so critical what you just said. The flexibility around it, the accessibility of it as well. I love the connection with your background in terms of, what things look like and how it impacts everything that we do. And that whole concept of the hardcore measurement versus sort of like thinking about it, stepping back a little bit and saying, what are we trying to achieve and for what purpose? I think that's how I kind of like relate to what you've just said, which I think it's phenomenal and really really important as we think about the conversation we're having, basically. So,
Yeah, and I am not sponsored by this, but one of my favorite books is called How to Measure Anything by Doug Hubbard. And when I used to teach at the university, I used to make my graduate students get that as part of their classes. And in it, he talks about the concept of why do we measure things? And
mhm,
really, the reason we measure things is so that we can make a decision, right? Because there's some uncertainty and we need to reduce the uncertainty in order to make a decision. For example, is this person, let's say, is this doctor qualified to perform this
mhm,
procedure? Is he or she skilled? If we knew the answer with perfect clarity, if we had a crystal ball, then we wouldn't need testing and assessment. We wouldn't need credentials because we would be psychic and we would know. But instead, we use these measures to help us reduce our uncertainty and then reduce the risk. We don't need to reduce those things to zero. We only need to reduce them to the point that we feel comfortable. So, surgery, yeah, there's a lot of rigor around that, right? There's a lot, I'm sure people
absolutely.
listening are working in the medical space, right? And there's a lot of rigor, a lot of importance. But what if we're talking about, is this hairdresser qualified to cut my hair, right? Those are credentials as well, but less risk, right? And so the measurement there can be more fuzzy. However, we're still measuring things, right? We're still reducing uncertainty, and that goes back to what you were just saying. All measures do not have to be these like physics level, ultimate precision sort of measures. They need to be fit for purpose.
Yeah.
And we also need to remember that measurement is not free. Even if for some reason, we have all of our psychometricians and all of our printing and all of our software developers, all of that's paid for, just the person who is being assessed, whether it's a formal test or whether it's even a feedback survey, that's still impinging on their time. It's still
Yeah.
taking up a little bit of social capital. And so we need to always be thinking about, what is the cost of the thing that I am measuring or assessing? The cost of doing the analysis, the cost of then looking at that outcome and making a decision, and what is the value of the information I'm getting out of it? Are they appropriately balanced?
Yeah, being mindful about the information that's being collected and how it's going to be used, and if it's not going to be used, then why collect that information?
I
Yeah,
see
I'm
this
excited.
happen all the
Hmm.
time.
Hmm.
Um, I
Yeah,
call
I think
this,
you're right.
yeah. Um, I like to call this the dragon problem, because so I see a lot of organizations, they really like to collect data. In particular, I work a lot with training and education
Mhm.
organizations.
Yeah.
And so I see oftentimes schools or training centers will do this. They'll collect a lot of data about student outcomes, reactions to classes, those sorts of things, right? And in particular, things that are quite easy to collect: smile sheets, throughput rates.
Mhm.
And then they'll assemble it, right? It's not free. So they'll assemble it in some sort of, database system. And then they'll create visualizations, maybe like that show like pie charts or bar charts, right? And then
Mhm.
everybody sits down and they admire it. So beautiful. Look at all the data. So just like
What
a
is it
dragon,
telling
they
us
go out and they
exactly?
collect, yeah, exactly. They collect all their gold, they collect all their data, and then they sit on it and they admire their hoard.
Mhm.
And so, this is one of the things we really need to work on, is making sure that we're taking data to decisions and that those
Mhm.
decisions are actually helping us reduce the uncertainty or reduce the risk or achieve our goals otherwise.
Yeah, no, so true. I really, I can relate to that and appreciate that for sure. So pivoting a little bit into like the whole concept, there's a huge link there, the concept of lifelong learning. So you've been at the forefront of advocating for lifelong learning as a cornerstone of professional development and career progression. So how does assessment actually play into this?
This is such a great question. And I hope that the testing, assessment, and evaluation folks who are listening realize that you play an absolutely essential role in this future of learning and development. So let me back up just a smidge to make sure
Mhm.
everybody's on track with us. Right? What is this idea of the future of lifelong learning? We are moving into a realm where it's not sufficient for somebody just to get their 12-year their initial high school diploma. Now that doesn't mean everybody needs to go to college or university. Rather, it means that there are new technologies, there are new policies, the world is
Mhm.
constantly
Yeah.
changing, and so we can all anticipate needing to continuously learn and evolve, whether it be just simply learning how to use the next cell phone that's released, or whether
Yeah.
it's learning how to use a brand new AI technology in your job, or new laws that are out there. We're always going to have to be learning. And so, as we move forward, we can't anticipate that we will all be in classrooms, from the ages of, let's say, 6 years old to 75. That we just don't have the time or interest to do that. But instead, we'll all use different tools that you're probably already familiar with, right? So things like websites, e-learning, massive open online courses, mobile
Mhm.
apps, and I'm sure things will get more sophisticated as well. Maybe we'll have digital twins or AI pedagogical agents that will follow us around, or other things that are more sophisticated. As we move into this lifelong learning ecosystem, this interconnected continuum, how do we know what people need, when they need it, and the best ways to deliver it to each person? Because otherwise, if we don't have that kind of filtering, that kind of support for self directed learning, and that kind of support for adaptive learning, for personalization to
Mhm.
individuals and contexts, or teams and organizations, then we're just not going to be efficient enough to make the system work. Plus, it probably won't be very effective if we don't have measurement threaded throughout the whole thing. So, we need to find ways to assess not only individuals' performance, or I'll say even more broadly, capabilities, knowledge, skills, attitudes, other non cognitive factors, their competencies. We need to also be able to assess appropriate traits and states about people,
Mhm.
traits being those
Yeah.
enduring characteristics that matter as far as learning, development, and employment go, as well as states, so like your emotional state or your contextual state. For example, is somebody very fatigued, or are they overloaded? Are they in an environment where they have low bandwidth, and so you have to adapt the content in that way? So we need to have all these different ways to pull in data. We need to determine where somebody is in the progress, right? Did they miss, module 4 that was a prerequisite, and so we need to do a little remediation, or can we jump ahead because they already know that material? Can we pull in data from a different place, saying, hey, this person doesn't have any formal credentials in, let's say, being an electrician, but they have a
Mhm.
lot of experience. So maybe we can't skip everything, but we can maybe accelerate in some areas, right? So pulling in data from different places, using multimodal and multi factor measures, using different
Yeah.
kinds of learning analytics so that we can make inferences to estimate people's capability or context and so on. Those are a lot of words, but basically what I'm saying is, if we think about somebody's lifelong learning trajectory as a network, almost as a spider web of different experiences. In order to optimize it, we need to use a lot of different measures with feedback loops. And those measures need to go across the whole spectrum of hard, objective, summative measures, soft, fuzzy, formative measures, and a whole variety of things in between that we can feed into systems to make good decisions.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then it's that flexibility, nimbleness, continuous aspect that it's adapting to the reality of everybody's kind of life and the way they operate. It's kind of like bite-sized approach that you can sort of put in together, connecting all the dots as the web you've been talking about, that then brings you to absolutely that next level. So it's not just about point in time assessment, it's continuous learning, assessment, opportunities to demonstrate your skills in many different ways.
You got it. Exactly. And when I talk to people sometimes about this sort of thing, they're like, "Well, that sounds very complicated. I don't know if we'll ever get to it." And I mean, that's fair, right? Because like what I'm describing is the end state, not like the first
Yep.
steps. But if you think about e-commerce today, think about first of all, we have all these interconnected systems. Imagine going back 50 years and telling people, "Yeah, this is what the internet's going to be like." People would think you were crazy, right?
Yep.
But we have all these interconnected systems. They're enabled through these open systems application programming interfaces or APIs, right? So Amazon can send your data to Facebook, which can send it to Google, and then you can get personalized ads and you can log in through all these different systems and they're tracking you, right? There's all this different measurement about where you are physically in the world, what are you buying, what are your demographics? And because of that, they can optimize the way that they do the marketing and the sales to you.
Hmm.
I mean,
Hmm.
that's great. Some of us might
Yeah.
find it a little creepy, but imagine if we could have the same power in an opt in, self sovereign, data privacy sort of way for the way that we do learning, development, and employment.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot to navigate there, particularly like I just mentioned on the policy side. What is the right mix of data privacy versus optimization? Not all of this has been solved, but there are definitely organizations working towards creating this internet of learning things. I'll say, for example, the IEEE Learning Technology Standards
Hmm.
Committee is working on building out these data standards, these APIs to enable that interconnectivity. The Chamber of Commerce Foundation is actually working on data standards as well as registries of jobs and competencies so that they can fuel that semantic interoperability across this ecosystem concept and many others. And so I do think we will be able to get to a place where we are capable, or at least we have the foundational backbone to have this data centric learning, development, talent ecosystem. But all those measurement
Yeah.
folks, if whether you are an analyst or a psychometrician or you work on the user interfaces, all of these different pieces are going to be necessary to make it
Yeah.
work. I mean, it's great if you have the pipes, but you need to have the things that flow through the pipes, and that is data, right? Data fuels everything. Data is the essential component to fuel artificial intelligence, which of course everything we're talking about is AI, right?
Yep.
So it's absolutely critical for the vision to have quality measures. Otherwise, it's all garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah, no, that's so exciting. And that whole concept of the dataverse and all of those importance element and considerations as we think
Did
about the impact it has across.
did
Yeah.
you just say dataverse?
Yeah, I did.
I love this. Did you just coin that? I think that we need to put like a little trademark next to it.
I
Uh,
know, like dataverse. So yeah,
because
absolutely. And but that's what it made me think about it as you were describing this and all of those connections there. Yeah, so I think that building from that. So in your keynote, so I reference your keynote at the ATP conference, and so I wanted to kind of like unpack that a little bit more. So you've introduced as part of that keynote the whole concept of the 60-year curriculum, a term that really describes the era of lifelong learning we're into. Like it's that's what's happening to us. So I'm interested in hearing a little bit more about this, what it means for professional across industries, and how it actually challenges the traditional education system.
Absolutely. And just to be clear, I cannot take credit for that amazing term, 60-year
Yeah.
curriculum. I first heard that from my colleague, Chris Deedy. There's a very fancy title for his job, but I will get it sort of right, which is he is the endowed professor of learning technologies at
Hmm.
Harvard and very, very sharp thinker on this. And I believe that he's worked with other colleagues on it as well, including John Richards and others. So
Hmm.
giving credit where it's due. But the concept
Absolutely.
here is that that, just like I was saying earlier, because of the pace of change in the world, the pace of change of technology, of global politics, of policies, of law, and just of the world around us, we will all need to be learning across our whole lives. Again,
Yeah.
not necessarily in a conventional classroom, but we will constantly need to be learning from about the age of 15 to about the age of 75. And in their book called The 60-Year Curriculum, Chris and John talk about the idea that people are going to have something like 5 to 7 careers across their lives in the future. And you can already see this happening with a lot of
Yeah.
people, particularly young people, right? Where they move not only from job to job, but actually adapt to wholly new careers. I mean, myself, I've even done this, right? I started out in art and graphic design and ended up,
Mhm.
doing computers, and now I do learning technologies, wholly different aspects. And each time I have to learn. And I think I think that's actually healthy and exciting, but challenging as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that, again, continue to build from that. You've touched also as part of that keynote on the concept of seamless integration of learning into the daily operations of lives, as you just mentioned. How do you envision the integration impacting assessment? And I think we've kind of touched a little bit on that, but just to further explore this concept,
I
want
can
to
I
hear
could
from you.
further explore this concept all day long. This is great.
I know.
But so we've talked about this already a little bit, right? We've talked
Mhm.
about the notion that there's lifelong learning, and you could imagine that people will engage in a lot of self-directed learning. And so, of course, I'm working in fill in the blank. There's a lot of jobs right now that are being affected, for example, by artificial intelligence, right?
Mhm.
Oh, I'm working in translation, and all of a sudden now my job is being threatened by artificial intelligence. I need to upskill into a new factor. But maybe I need to upskill into using artificial intelligence to
Mhm.
expedite my work, or I need to start doing sentiment analysis with it in addition to the translation. I'm just making some things up. People who are out there who are translators are probably going like, this is not how my job works. But the point being is that you can imagine different situations where people will go and seek additional learning in whatever form. And we need to help them be able to find that information. We need to make sure that they have appropriately matched information for their needs and their level. This is where that data comes in and where that interconnectivity,
Mhm.
so somebody's individual learner record can be ingested into different systems so that they can get appropriate adaptation to their needs. And then also, we didn't really touch on this yet, but the idea of credentialing, whether those
Mhm.
be
Yeah.
micro credentials or macro credentials, right? Micro, just like little things, like I did a 5 minute thing, or I did a, 5 hour thing, or macro, right? I did a whole semester, I did a whole degree. Doesn't really matter. What we really want to be able to do is have these credentials that are verifiable. In
Mhm.
other words, we know what organization issued them. They are cryptographically signed so that we can trust them and that they can go into somebody's learner worker wallet or whatever you want to call it. Sometimes you hear learner worker wallet, sometimes you hear integrated learner wallet, comprehensive learner wallet, different terms for this concept. But just like those cookies, like we were talking about with with marketing, right? Where they go into your browser and you have these cookies that follow you around. You could imagine these verifiable credentials will follow you around, and that makes it so that you can find the information you need, make sure it's appropriately aligned, and then validate to others when you go to the next step in the process, like a relay race team, right? You're passing the baton of data
Yeah.
about yourself from place to place to place. The other thing though, so that's that we can kind of imagine that, right? You can kind of
Mhm.
imagine like a Netflix model, except instead of just like cool movies, you're getting training and education. Okay, that kind of fits with our mental model now. But I think also what we're going to see as we move forward is a reduction of the boundaries between formal education and training. Like I go to class, I go to a vo-tech school, informal learning.
Mhm.
I'm doing an online MOOC, I'm getting an apprenticeship, I'm having some social learning, and then on the job experiences, so operational things. And so those collapsing boundaries look like I could be on the job, using a computer to do something, and then a tutorial pops up because it notices that I'm struggling with something. Or maybe I have some augmented reality that has an overlay of the aircraft that I'm trying to repair as a mechanic, right? And it walks me through that. And then it realizes that I'm still struggling. And then it connects me to a mentor, a human mentor, through my augmented reality display. And so my human mentor, let's say she can see what I'm doing on the aircraft because it has eye tracking and it has a camera. And so she's able to give me pointers and make overlays in real time, right?
Yeah.
And then she's able to say, you know what, say you are really terrible at being a mechanic. You need to go back to school and assign me to go to formal learning. Um, Obviously what I just said was all completely make believe, but it's not too
But is it?
far from, yeah, as
Yeah,
I
I
say, like it doesn't
know.
exist today, but it's
Mm-hmm.
not too far away from what could exist. And that's where I see things going. And I hope it's really obvious why measurement is so critical in each of those
Yeah.
places and how it plays a role. Everything from these like really cool futuristic neurophysiological sensors that are starting to become commercially available now. Eye tracking, EEG, heart rate, galvanic skin response, right? To give us really good state and immediate measures. The AI interpretation of physical systems and context, these fuzzy measures of individuals' performance or their emotional states, and of course, again, these hard measures that we are much more
Yeah.
used to in a more traditional assessment sense. All of them feeding into this system.
I know, and it's mind blowing when you think of it. But at the
Yeah,
same time, it's kind of important to open our mind to that possibility because it can fundamentally change the way we learn, the way we grow, we evolve, and how we're putting together those bits and pieces to really consolidate and illustrate our capabilities, our skills, upskilling ourselves, being able to showcase where we're at. I love the concept of having like from a digitization. It's almost like you have in the palm of your hand, everything showcasing. Here's what I've done. It's been measured this way. It's being recognized this way in that flexible manner. To me, that is exactly the opportunities that it presents to us as an industry. It's immense.
yeah, absolutely. And I want to highlight two things as we talk about this. The first being, and I already said this, but I really want to foot stomp it
Mhm.
because it's so critical for me to say. What I'm describing is what the end state will look like. Well, maybe not the end state, but right, but this is the end state of this vision, right? And that's years down the road. We will not build that all at once, and nor do we need to. We can
Yeah.
do little bits at a time. If we simply start to do a better job of taking information in about learners or employees as they come into a testing event, a training or education event. And if we start to do a better job of passing that baton of information from event to event using different data standards like the ones I mentioned earlier from the IEEE, that starts to move us forward. If we
Yeah.
just start to move to a system where we have competencies that are defined in a systematic way with verifiable credentials linked to them, and we start to pass them from place to place, that starts to move us forward. So we can take small steps even just within an organization. You don't even have to have this like big interconnected around the whole world sort of idea, right? We can start small and
Mhm.
just start to move forward with this learning ecosystem concept locally, and you'll start to have benefits from it. So that's the first thing to mention. The second thing to mention is there is definitely a risk of a digital divide for people
Mm.
who don't have access to all of the highest end technology or the infrastructure. So as we think about this learning ecosystem idea, we want to think about the high end that I described a minute ago where you have, 5G with your augmented reality and your phone a
The
friend, right?
cool stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Like there are places where that's absolutely necessary.
Mhm.
Like I want my aircraft to work really, really well when I get on it, right? So
So
that's
do
probably a good place to
I.
invest. But then there are other places where you could be using SMS phone text, right? This is really working well in some austere environments where people can get, where kids in a K-12 environment are getting like math or other STEM topics through SMS devices. And that can be part of the ecosystem as well.
Mhm.
Even conventional non digital activities, a teacher in a classroom, hiking in the woods, these are things that can also receive verifiable credentials as long as at some point they touch a digital system, a digital grade book at the end, some sort of way to check in on your mobile device. So I think we need to think holistically. We need to make sure that we don't create a worse digital divide. But I think that that's feasible. And I think that's all part of the incremental implementation of this concept.
Yeah. No, and I agree. And I think that again, as we're talking about this, it's about talking about a vision. It's looking at where it the opportunities in terms of how it can evolve, where it will be, but also looking at ways of embracing change. So,
Yeah.
what message would you have for our listeners who are looking into innovations in their fields, but are a little bit hesitant about the future because all of this sounds exciting, but it could be a little scary at times as well. So, yeah, I'm definitely interested in hearing more from you on that.
Yeah, I think this is a great question. And I talk to people all the time who are very hesitant. And, there's a lot of reasons why people are hesitant, very good reasons, particularly when I talk about things like artificial intelligence or like the next technologies that are
Hmm.
coming down the line. People are nervous. They worry about things like privacy, security, um, job stability, right? Very reasonable
Yeah,
concerns.
yeah.
But I often ask people, do you think, just as an example, do you think that there will be less AI in your future?
I'm
Ever
sure the
in the
answer of
future?
that is probably no.
Probably no.
Yeah.
There will probably
Hmm.
never be a time where you will experience less artificial
Yeah.
intelligence or less advanced technologies around you. Do you think there's
Yeah.
going to be a time in the future where there's going to be less disruption from these kind of competitors
Hmm.
across industry? No, right?
Hmm.
Because the technology is really democratizing the ability for small startups or even individuals to compete with legacy companies and legacy ideas. In fact, sometimes even better because of their agility. So, my point here is things will only accelerate. So you can already see the merry-go-round starting to go, right? And it's going a little bit slowly,
Hmm.
but it's still a little scary. And you're thinking, should I jump on that merry-go-round or not? It's spinning. I don't know. I'm kind of comfortable over here, but it's only going to go faster and faster.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
so it's so much better to get involved now and to try things out. And so my advice to people is number one, try things out now. And when
Yeah.
I say things, I mean it's probably going to be whatever is appropriate for your industry. Almost certainly generative AI is going to apply to probably everybody listening. Different learning analytics methods, potentially different input output devices. I already mentioned a few of like the neurophysiological sensors or like video and like doing the automated video assessment. So try these things out. But when I say try it out, what I mean is get the cheapest or the free version that you could find. And even if it doesn't meet all your requirements, just find whatever cheaper
Hmm.
free version you can find and give it to a team. I would call them a learning engineering team, right? People that have a diversity of different backgrounds, but that take a human centered design approach that uses the learning science to scale up best practices through engineering methods. So take your team of diverse people and give them a task and have them work with these technologies because what you're going to find is a couple things. First of all, I'm sure that they will experiment with it and come up with great new ideas. And they might find that that technology is not even the right one for you. But second, they'll work on getting the people and processes right. And that is
Yes.
actually the thing that is going to be most telling on whether or not you're going to be successful with new technology is having people and processes who are ready and accepting. So start small with the technology and really invest in the people and the processes. And then if you're happy, you can move forward. And then the last thing I would say is give yourself some time to really work with these. I often see people will take a new system, and it could be anything, right? It could be a new concept, it could be a new technology, whatever, and they try it once. And they're like, well, that didn't work very well. Look, we tested it and it's poorer than our old status quo version that we've been doing for 20 years. Well, of course, you tried it once, right? How many times do you get something right the first time? So try it once, try it twice, sit with it a while, move forward slowly and incrementally, and really, really invest in the people and processes as you do so.
Yeah, it's the host concept. I like to say that don't try to boil the ocean. Like, kind of take it like step by step. Allow yourself to try, not be scared of the ultimate outcomes in the end. It's all the progression you can see, and embracing that philosophy of trying. Figuring things out, getting the people together. I just love those very applicable recommendations that you've just outlined. It's getting the people together to help figure it out, not being afraid of failure, but learning from that, just building from it, and but not to try to solve everything all at the same time.
Exactly. And this goes back to the concepts we've been talking about like the 60-year curriculum and lifelong
Hmm.
learning. It's really a shift in mindset in a lot of ways from the things we
Yeah.
do, let's say learning or assessment as a product, to learning and assessment as a continuous service, something that we are constantly doing, collecting data about, improving, and redelivering. And so that's why at the Association of Test Publishers Innovation
Hmm.
and Testing Conference, I was talking about the concept of LearnOps. So that was
Yes.
my cute title for my
Love it.
presentation. And it was a play on the concept of DevOps, which
Hmm.
is a computer science term where it smooshes together two words, development and operations, so that it becomes this continuous thing. That's what software as a service, cloud services, they usually use this DevOps approach where it's continuously improving, getting new patches, fixing bugs, releasing new features. And so that's what we need to think about within our space as well. So hopefully we can get to this learn ops or assess ops mindset
I love
for our talent
it.
dataverse that we are building here into the future.
I love it. Like, we're creating all those terms and just putting them together, and then hopefully it's mind blowing for people, and then it's going to start a trend. I think it's great. So I really, I just want to point out like your insights into the future of lifelong learning, testing, assessment. Uh, offers a lot of food for thoughts for us, for our listeners, for our industry, but also it offers a call to action for everyone, like in the credentialing space, assessment space, but across the world, across everything as well. So I really appreciate you taking the time to share your expertise and vision. And before we wrap up, I just wanted to give you an opportunity for any final thoughts or advice for our listeners as we navigating the change. So yeah, there's just so much here to continue to unpack. But yeah, any final thoughts?
So, a couple things. First, I do want to direct listeners to my new book. It's called Engines of Engagement, a curious book about generative AI. And it's more of a philosophical book. It's illustrated, it's a lot of fun to read. It's written with two co authors, Julian Stodd and Jeff Stead. And we have an entire chapter about learning and assessment and about how generative AI will change the future. Oh, and it's free. You can get it at, if you go to bit.ly/engines of engagement. So bit.ly/ all one word, engines of engagement. You can find it on, the usual suspects, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and so on as well. But you can get it free digitally on that website. So check that out. Think about generative AI because I think that is going to be a big change for our future. The second thing I would direct folks to is the concept of learning engineering. So, all the
Mm,
things I talked about
yes.
today really could fall under that moniker. This idea that we're going to bring software developers, learning scientists, teachers, learning environment designers, psychometricians, subject matter experts, you name it, right? All these people will start to work together in this learn ops sort of mindset. And if that sounds far fetched, let me tell you, there are already people working towards this. And there are great communities out there like the Icicle Learning Engineering community that are available for people to join, share information, and get involved. Whether you want to talk about verifiable credentials and psychometrics, or you want to talk about pedagogy for K-12.
Yeah, no, this is great. I'm gonna go get the book right away because that sounds super interesting, and I appreciate you sharing that with our listeners because, any tools, any opportunities to be able to learn more, to engage more with this very important conversation, is much appreciated. So, again, thank you for being so generous with your time, your thoughts. I've learned a lot from this conversation, and I'm just hoping that we can continue to engage in these types of conversations. So thank you so
I
much
am up
again.
to talk about measurement anytime. So thank you so much for having me on. It was great talking to you.